And we're live.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's Diane Moxley with New Jersey Revolution Radio. This evening, we have with us some of the members of the delegation that just got back from their trip to Venezuela, and we're going to have a report back. So this evening, we have with us Joe Lombardo. Joe Lombardo with the United National Anti-War Coalition. We have Margaret Flowers, one of the co-directors of Popular Resistance, with Kevin Zeese, the other co-director of Popular Resistance. So thanks so much for being with us this evening, guys. When did you get back?
We all have different answers.
It was a little complicated returning. So I got back first Sunday morning.
I got that second Monday afternoon.
And Joe?
I got back a couple hours ago. I was the last one out of Venezuela.
The problem was American Airlines canceled all their flights because of the civil unrest and the high risk of Americans being arrested at any moment for no reason. All lies, of course, but they stopped their flights, and that caused a lot of confusion for our exit.
But it is one of the little things that the U.S. and the U.S. companies do to make life a little bit harder for all the people in Venezuela. So everybody had to scramble for seats on other planes that had reservations, or seats on American, which is the main U.S. Airline that goes into Caracas. And it just makes it more difficult, and that's what they're trying to do.
Wow. I didn't realize you guys were that scattered in your flights.
It wasn't intentional. We actually did a video the day that American Airlines announced this cancellation, walking through the streets of Venezuela to show the civil unrest. Families walking in a beautiful sunshine day, having ice cream, hot dogs, kids. There was no civil unrest at all. Venezuela was very calm and very collected. There was no problem. It was total false information by the U.S. government and American Airlines.
Wow, and they grounded all of their flights, American Airlines.
Stopped them all completely, yeah.
Yeah, it was right around the same time that the U.S. diplomats were expelled from Venezuela, and so the State Department put out this thing saying, anybody who's there from the United States, you're on your own now. And they tried to make it sound really scary, but we were never scared.
Wow. Well, sorry you guys had a lot of bumps in the road, not due to civil unrest. Yeah.
Well, if that hadn't happened, we would not have met with President Maduro, because his meeting was scheduled after many of us were leaving. And because it was delayed, we actually got 10 of our members of our delegation, at least, were able to meet with President Maduro for 90 minutes in a private meeting. So we can thank American Airlines and the U.S. government for that meeting. For
helping that happen. Wow. So who organized this delegation to Venezuela? What was were there a sponsoring organization or two that?
It was organized by the U.S. Peace Council. And the U.S. Peace Council is part of an organization known as the World Peace Council. And they have affiliate organizations in many different countries. So they had the capability of doing this. And in particular, they have a relationship with a group called COSI, which stands for Committee Solidarity, International Solidarity Committee, and they acted as our host, provided translators and got us places to stay, and acted as our host while we were there.
Okay, and how many people were in your delegation?
There were 13 people from the United States total.
Okay.
And Canada.
And
Canada. Oh, thank you. 2 were from Canada. That's
right. Okay. And I know we had a good amount of our Green Party, a good amount of Greens were in the delegation. What other organizations were in the delegation?
There was the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the International Action Center, Black Alliance for Peace, Ajama Baraka, another notable Green, was there. The Women Against Military Madness from Minneapolis, and then from Canada was Canadian Peace Congress, and Eva Bartlett, who's an independent journalist from Canada, and also Veterans for Peace. Who am I leaving out, Joe?
That's a pretty good list.
I think you got it all.
All right.
Okay. And so how long were you guys there? I know the trip got extended, but and you had some bumps in the road even on your arrival to Venezuela, correct?
Yeah, we arrived when the U.S. Created blackout was happening, and that gave American Airlines an excuse not to fly to Venezuela. So on the way down, we had to change our flights again and go through Copa Airlines through Panama. But again, again, American Airlines canceled their flights, but other airlines were flying in. So we got to Venezuela, the blackout was happening. It was actually a really good time. I'm glad we got there for the blackout, so we could see how the Venezuelan government and people responded to the blackout, because I think it was a very impressive response. They really showed unity. They took care of each other. The government made sure that food was delivered, that water was available, because when the blackout happened, it happened because of multiple U.S. attacks, cyber attack, electromagnetic attacks, and physical attacks in Venezuela. The government was able to work hard to get that fixed quickly. They increased their bus transit because the subway was out in Caracas. The water pumps were out, so they had to provide water. People had to walk with buckets to get water to bring home, either to drink or for just toilet and other purposes. And then same food. Food had to be delivered. Then luckily, Venezuela has a really excellent food distribution program, the CLAP, that each month gives food out to 6 million people at a very low price. They have boxed foods that last 2 weeks or a month, depending on the community, and they're at a very low price. We calculate the price to be about the price of a cup of coffee.
No, even less. Like
less than a cup of coffee.
A third of a penny or something like that.
So it's a token amount of money, but they provide a lot of food to people. 6 million families get those CLAP boxes each month.
On a regular basis.
The other thing that was important was when there's blackouts in the United States, sometimes we see rioting. People have access to goods that they normally don't.
Sure.
We didn't see that rioting there. We heard that there was some that was really instigated by the so-called opposition at another part of the country, but there was nothing like that. It was just cooperation among people to help people out during this period. And the other thing I like to compare it to is when, after the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, it took the United States 11 months to get the electricity back. And in Venezuela, they got it back very quickly. And when the power went out in Puerto Rico, nobody even talked about invading the United States. But we're using that as an excuse to say, you see how terrible the government is? We have to do something about it.
Yeah, the impressive thing I'd say about that, I asked people in Venezuela, why was there no looting? Why was there no chaos? And they said two things. One, they said deep education on imperialism and revolutionary change. A lot of education. It's constant. We saw that education while we were there. We can talk about that too. It's actually the kind of education they do. But second, organization. Because they are not just a representative democracy, they're also a participatory democracy. Many communities have what are called community councils. 200 households can get together and form a community council that has general assemblies and decides what they need for the community, and then they apply to the federal government for funds, make it happen. On top of the community councils, there are communes, multiple councils coming together, trying to also improve their communities. So having that infrastructure in place of organized communities and educated communities is why I think there was such a calm and unified response to this electrical crisis. The U.S. wanted a crisis. Absolutely. They wanted an excuse to intervene, but the Venezuelan people knew that and didn't give them that opportunity.
That's great. That's great. So they have a sense of community that we don't have here in the U.S. We just come and go, get in our cars, go to work, get in the house, don't really talk to your neighbors. So that's beautiful that not only do they have a sense of community, but they're actually involved in governing their local areas. That's great. And I'm sure that builds the sense of community. They're working together on a regular basis.
Of course, in the United States, we call that hyper-democracy dictatorship. When in reality, Maduro was legitimately elected in the best-run elections in the world, really. Jimmy Carter said that, and I was there for that election. They are very well run. And so it's not a dictatorship at all. He's a legitimate, democratically elected president. He's not an authoritarian, quite restrained, actually. If he was authoritarian, Guaido would be in prison right now because he's obviously committing treason.
Yeah, that's true. They, thank God, nothing has happened to Guaido, because I'm sure that Maduro would be to blame in Maduro's government. He's not in jail. And, if we could talk a little bit about Guaido, that they use the phrase that he's the self-appointed president. So if you guys want to touch on that, how did he come to even dare self-appoint himself, even though we know this is some kind of screwy manipulation that doesn't even exist in their constitution? What's his argument, and then our government's argument for how we can recognize him as president?
Joe, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's I mean, the way he became president is he got in front of a microphone and announced himself president. Nobody voted for him to be president. Mm-hmm. And the person they did vote for was Maduro. And during that election, of course, they had a higher percentage of the electorate voting than we had in our last presidential election. And of course, our president didn't get the majority, but he got almost 70%. Mm. But I guess because he got a majority, they don't consider it valid. Mm. But he was he wasn't really, but he at a point became or claimed to be the Speaker of the National Assembly. And the way that happens is basically it's a rotating position among the main parties that were in power. And his time wasn't there to be in that position, but he kind of jumped ahead of some of the other people and then proclaimed himself president. Now, their constitution has a way in which the head of the National Assembly can proclaim themselves president in the very same way that our Constitution does, or in a similar way. In other words, if the president dies and the vice president is not possible because he's either dead or incapacitated, or if they're incapacitated and could not do it, there's a few reasons like that where the head of our House would become the president. And they have a similar thing. But none of that other criteria came into being. I mean, the president was still there. He was clearly capable of continuing, but they tried to say that he wasn't. And that gave them the excuse for Guaido to call himself president. And immediately, the U.S. recognized him, because this was a tactic that was designed in Washington, not in Caracas. However, he's lost a lot of credibility, and we saw that very, very clear. The last couple of demonstrations that the opposition tried to make happen in Caracas really fizzled. They did not happen. I think the reason for that was the demonstration before that where he spoke, which was also a smaller demonstration. He actually called, imagine a president of a country, he called for the United States to invade his country. So imagine a president calling for another country to invade his country. And when questioned about this by the media, they said, a bomb doesn't know if it's hitting someone in the opposition or a Chavista. And he said, well, yeah, but we got to expect some collateral damage to fight for democracy. And I think that caused a lot of people to really see who he is. So there was a lot of talk that maybe the vice presidential candidate, quote unquote, the vice president in his administration, was the head of a bigger party than his. His is an extremely right-wing, small party. wanted to come in, and people said, well, maybe he's better to the American powers as a martyr than he is as someone to try to claim to be president, because he's not doing a very good job. And everything since the coup attempt on February 23rd and the trying to get people to desert from the military and trying to get over this fake Trojan horse aid from the United States on the 23rd, and everything since that he's done has really failed. And even it was very clear that the blackout, they thought maybe this would cause people to rebel against Maduro. But it was very clear that people understood what it was, and that it just stoked the anger towards him and towards his American handlers. And so he's not a president in that country by any means. He controls nothing. It's the Maduro government that controls all the agencies and has the allegiance of all the organizations of people's power and decides what to do and what not to do, and has the police and the courts and the military and everybody else are part of the Maduro government. He has no control and no influence at all in that country. It's outside where he has the influence. He's important to them in the United States. So the United States says, well, we're going to give our money to him because he's the legitimate president. And U.S. allies can say, we're going to recognize him because he's the U.S. president. But the Venezuelan people don't recognize him that way at all.
Wow.
It's a joke. And at the first press conference we held while we were there, one of our members from Vets for Peace, just as a joke, proclaimed himself president of the United States, because that's all that really Guaido did, And it was clear it was a joke. And people, it is the subject of jokes.
Did he ask Maduro to recognize him as president of the United States?
No, and I think it's important to understand that the National Assembly, which he is a member of, is actually a defunct organization right now. They're in contempt of the Supreme Court of Venezuela, so it's not even a functioning body. And he's somebody, again, who comes from a very small party. I think he didn't even come in first in his election, so he's not a powerful person at all, but he is absolutely a tool of the United States. He was made by and for the United States. He studied at George Washington University, Washington, D.C. He was trained by this group called Canvas, which is a partnership with this corporate CIA called Stratfor that went down and taught Guaido and other young people like himself of how to overthrow governments. He was part of the very violent guarimbas or blockades that took place in 2014 that caused the deaths of many innocent people, including burning people alive just because they looked like they were a Chavista, including putting wire across the street so that people on motorcycles would ride by and get decapitated. I mean, really brutal, gruesome things that this guy was a leader. He was out there in front of these things. And so he's backed by the United States. As soon as he announced, it was like it was all ready. The United States immediately recognized him. Canada recognized him. European countries recognized him. It's now 50 countries that, because of U.S. pressure, have recognized Guaido. And it's just ridiculous. It makes them look like fools because nobody in their right mind could say that this guy is president. In fact, just the other day, Elliot Abrams was questioned by the press about how Guaido was in power. And Elliot Abrams had a really hard time explaining it. And in fact, when the press asked questions, Abrams just looked dumber and dumber because he was, because the press were like, well, what do you mean? And Elliot's like, well, his power will start when Maduro leaves, so he's in power, but he's not really in power yet. I mean, it's just like he just looked like a fool. So the longer this goes on, the more ridiculous the United States and its allies look.
In our recent newsletter on popularresistance.org, we have an article about some of the falsehoods that this whole imperialist action is based on. Yeah. And we have a section on Guaido's being appointed as president, and how it violates the Constitution in multiple ways. It's not even close to legitimacy about how he's appointed. It's totally the opposite of what the Constitution says as far as when a National Assembly president can become the president. So there's no basis for it. And what's been happening has been he's been embracing the United States. So he's more and more looking like the puppet that he is.
Yeah.
He's being investigated now for his ties to this electrical outage. He's being investigated for taking money from foreign sources, which is not allowed when you're a member of the National Assembly. At the same time, he's been, calling for the military and being tied to this electrical outlet and being tied to the economic war. Maduro is doing the opposite. He's providing food. They're building housing. They built 3 million residences for the poorest Venezuelans in the last few years. That's 3 million people, average family of 4. You're talking about 10 or 12 million people getting homes out of a population of 30 million people, providing food every month. I mean, it's like people can see. Guaido is for the American imperialists. Maduro is for the Venezuelan people, and that's the choice. And so Maduro's getting more popular. The opposition is getting less popular.
If I could just quickly add, one of the meetings that we had while we were there was with the president of the National Electoral Council, and that is actually one of their 5 branches of government. It's an independent branch, and her name is Tibisay Luceno, and she's just an amazing woman, longtime feminist. All the people that we met with in the government just were like amazing, down to earth, like real people. And she explained the whole electoral process to us in the last election, and answered our questions. And then at the end, she mentioned that there are a number of countries like the United States that are refusing to recognize the legitimacy of the election in 2018. And so she wants to go to the United Nations to provide the evidence to defend the legitimacy of that election. The United States sanctioned her, so she can't travel. They sanctioned her for degrading democracy.
Her whole career has been building democracy.
Right. And,
wow.
Yeah, and so she can't go to the UN in the United States, and Switzerland is complicit with this, so she can't go to Geneva either. And this is really a travesty. This is terrible that the United States is going to these, disingenuous lengths of sanctioning this woman.
Now, where were you guys when you were in Venezuela? I know, people have concern about, in this country, there's a lot of propaganda, so it's hard to get information out. So people are concerned that there's chaos, there's, mass demonstrations for the opposition and poverty and chaos. So where were you guys, and what did you see?
Well, I'll start. We were in Caracas. We didn't get a chance to go other places. However, one of our members, Eva Bartlett, has stayed for an extra couple of weeks, and she intends to travel around the country a little bit more, and folks can follow her on Facebook and see what her reports are. We spoke to a lot of government people, but we also met and we spoke with some opposition people. And we tried in 2 occasions when they announced demonstrations, opposition demonstrations, to go to these demonstrations. One happened after just about everybody else was gone, and I was still there. And we heard that there was this opposition demonstration that was going to, which everybody assumed was going to be a provocation, because they were going to march from a square in Caracas through a Chavista area, which was just a provocative move, go to the National Assembly building, which is also where the Constituent Assembly meets, and the thought was that they might try to take it over. And the reason that they thought this is because there's in Geneva also in the next couple of days convening the a Human Rights Commission, and they thought that perhaps there'd be tear gas or scenes of people being attacked by the police or something like this. And so this was the plan. So we first went to the square where they were supposed to start the march. We took the subway there. It was very interesting because the subways are nice. They're but they're also free. You just walk onto the subways and you go where you want to go. So we went to the square and we saw large numbers of police. But what was interesting was there were brigades of women police, in formation, and they were kind of standing in the front. And so we asked, well, why are there so many women police that are put up in such a prominent position? And they said, well, when we expect a provocation, we find that the women are better at lowering the level of confrontation. So this is the way they were preparing, not to suppress them in any way, but to try to lower the level of confrontation. And there's other ways they do this. We should talk to you about these things called vertical gyms, which would be very interesting. I don't know if Margaret was there when we heard this.
She wasn't.
But it's a very interesting one. In any case, they never showed up. So I was with one other person, Ava Bartlett from our delegation, and we decided to walk the route they were going to go to see if we could come in contact with anybody or see anybody. And it was just like a regular day out in the streets. Everybody was doing shopping and running around and with their kids and buying ice cream or doing what people do. And we walked all the way to the National Assembly, which was 6 subway stops. It was a long walk. And we didn't see anybody in the way. But when we got there, there were a bunch of Chavista people around. They had a little tent up and they were trying to talk to people and things. And then there was this group of well-dressed people, about 30 of them. And so we tried to talk to them and see, are you the demonstration? And they were the demonstration. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of that. And you see how these people look and how few there are. And then there's a bunch of people just kind of lounging around watching them. And those are mostly Chavista supporters, not in any way being threatening, just trying to see what was going on. But then and we did talk to these people, and I want to tell you about the difference between talking to a Chavista supporter and talking to an opposition supporter, because I think this is the basis of the conflict. But I just want to first tell you what happened next. When we went to one of the big Chavista demonstrations, we noticed a number of people on like motorcycles and motorbikes, and we were told that there's a group that comes together on motorcycles and motorbikes to support Maduro and to support the Bolivarian Revolution. And all of a sudden they arrived in gigantic numbers. Again, if you go to the Facebook page, you'll see, just for blocks, as far as you could see, the whole block filled with these motorcycle people who were coming to the National Assembly because they also heard that there was the possibility they were going to try to take over the National Assembly. So these people were coming to protect the National Assembly, not to harass anybody, but to protect the National Assembly. But it didn't have to happen. And the police handled these opposition people with kid gloves. They brought them behind a barricade where they stood around in a circle and made some kind of proclamation out of sight of just about everybody. And that was the demonstration. That was the second demonstration in Caracas while we were there that they called that some people from our group tried to go to, and that it didn't materialize.
But Joe, contrast that to the demonstration we went to that was anti-imperialist.
Yeah, so the anti-imperialist
that was massive.
Was just a sea of red as far as
you couldn't see the beginning and end. It was so long.
You couldn't see it just went for blocks, this direction, backward, forward.
100,000 plus people
celebrating in the streets. People were dancing and supporting and chanting. It was very, very interesting. But here's what I noticed. When you spoke to an opposition supporter, they typically would say something like, well, there's not opportunity. You can't go out and you can't buy things and all this kind of stuff. We want to go to America, the land of opportunity, and we want to be able to become rich too, it was that kind of mentality. But it was basically about them, what they could do to advance themselves. When you talk to a Chavista supporter, they talk to you about how people who didn't have housing have been given housing, how people who didn't have food, how they have free transportation. You could get gas for your car for free or for your motorbike for free. You just go in and you get it. And how the whole society is being lifted up for the first time. Education is free and college is free. And this is a country that's being sanctioned and having very, very difficult times financially right now. But they make the priority the people who are the most needy. And that really pisses off the wealthy and the middle class, which is the base of the opposition. So this concept of me versus us, and that's really the real concept of socialism versus capitalism. And I think that's the debate that's happening in this society, and it's being played out on the streets and with these demonstrations and the blackouts and everything that's happening.
And you were sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
We were in Caracas the whole time, but we did go to different parts of Caracas. So we did go to the barrio, one of the biggest barrios. It's 1.5 million people. It's called Katia, and we were taken on a tour by some of the people there. They showed us how they had they're doing their own food production there. They're reproducing rabbits. They want every family to have rabbits that they can grow for meat. They call it protein. And then they also have greenhouses and compost areas, and they last year produced 17 tons of fresh produce. And when we talked to the people there, we said, well, are you, how bad is it? Are you starving? And the women started laughing, and they're like, no, we need a diet. We need more exercise. So, and when you look around, all the babies were chubby and kids looked healthy. You didn't see any homeless. I was looking for homeless and couldn't find them. But they are struggling because of the economic war that the United States is waging. They are growing food everywhere they can grow food. There's a whole Ministry of Urban Agriculture that's working particularly with youth, and we visited one of their gardens and talked to them. People who I met on the streets showed me photos of their balcony gardens and how proud they were of what they were growing on their small spaces on their balconies. But the prices of goods are very high there because the United States has artificially, raised the value of the dollar compared to the bolivars. And so it's hard, people do struggle to pay for things. And then medications is a real issue there. And Alfred de Zayas, who's the former head of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, did a report, I think it was last summer, and basically said that the economic war, which is causing them to not have the medications and the medical equipment that they need, is actually in violation of international law. It violates the Rome Statute. And so we met with the previous health minister, who's now in charge of procurement, and his name is Henry Ventura, and he showed us these graphs and how the units of medication per person in the country has fallen to about 20% of what it was before this economic war. So literally on television at night, during the news shows between the stories, they'll flash these little things that have a person's name, the medication that they need, and their phone number. So if somebody has extra, they can contact that person and share with them the medication that they have. They're trying to find ways around these issues. And then just last night, Maduro did a big announcement about how he's opening up more pharmaceutical manufacturing factories in Venezuela. They used to have quite a few, 58 of them, but because they weren't able to get the precursors because of the sanctions, that had fallen down, but now he's ramping that back up. So they're really trying to do what they can to get around the impacts of the economic warfare. And while they're very resilient and they're holding out, we should not have any illusion that this is, not causing hardship for them. It is causing significant hardship for them. Let
me just make one point about this neighborhood, this barrio that Margaret mentioned, that really, I think, crystallizes why these people hate U.S. imperialism, hate the oligarchs, and will not go back to that. This barrio of 1.5 million people was not on the maps of the city of Caracas because no public services were going there before Hugo Chavez was elected. It was not even on the map. These were treated as if they didn't even exist, these people, 1.5 million of them. Now they have their own, their own community councils and collectives and cooperatives building their own food. They have transit. They have healthcare. They have doctor on every block is one of their is the way they approach healthcare. And in the old days, they were non-people. They didn't exist.
And now they register to vote. And if you have any sense of
that's a good one. Register to vote.
Country who hates the idea that poor people could vote, it's the same there, and it really gets under the skin because now these people can vote.
Yeah.
The woman who leads the electoral council told us when she came in, 20% were not registered to vote. Now only 4% are not registered to vote. When she came in, there were not adequate machines.
Wow.
There were not adequate machines in various precincts.
Or people might have had to walk too far.
Yeah, so they keep and a key foundational difference between the U.S. and Venezuela is we don't have a right to vote in our Constitution. They do. When you have a right to vote, that means the government has to make that right when you can actually function and exercise. And so that means register people. That means make machines available. That make sure your votes are counted accurately. And I'll just tell you one thing that the Venezuela electoral system does that no other country in the world does that makes their electoral system better than anyone in the world. On election night, they do what's called a citizen's audit, where a public audit, they have their machines, they have electronic machines, but they also have a paper record. The voter looks at the paper record and puts it in the ballot. At the end of the night, they do a citizen's audit where 53% of machines of every precinct are randomly selected. And then they have an audit that's open to the public, that the opposition, all parties can see, that the media can see. They take a paper out of the ballot box, read it, show it to everybody, and they count it. They go through every vote for half the machines and look for discrepancy between the electronic and the paper record. If there's no discrepancy, they trust the machines. If not, they do a hand count. No other country in the world does that. The U.S. resists audits. The U.S. resists recounts. There, they do it proactively to make sure people can have confidence in their vote. There's no possible way for there to be fraud in the voting system in Venezuela because every person comes in, does a fingerprint that starts the process and does a fingerprint that ends the process. And so everyone, they know every vote is legitimate and they count every vote with a paper ballot and an electronic ballot.
And that's what's interesting when you hear our news media talking about the election in May of 2018. It's all vague. There's no details, no specifics. So, and then hearing all of this, there's nothing. There's none of the grounds met for self-appointing.
Well, there were 150 international election observers for that election. And those election observers just wrote the EU last week to say the EU, we unanimously concluded that this was a fair election that was trustworthy. And you put out a press release that says the opposite. Your press release is fanciful. It's not based on fact. The facts are this was a reliable election. So that's what the 150 plus international election observers are telling the EU about their lies.
Wow. And the scary thing is, we're talking about that, the masses are doing better now under, starting with the Chavez government and now under the Maduro government. So the masses are doing better, but, there's no denying the sanctions are hurting the people, but that's our sanctions and our pressuring of other nations. But I guess it was just a few days ago, Trump meeting with Bolsonaro, and he was talking about that we need to strengthen the sanctions. I don't even know what that means. What is there left to do at this point? Yeah.
First of all, that meeting is a very dangerous meeting because, as we know, the first Latin American country to join NATO, to become a NATO partner, is Colombia, which is used as a staging ground for the U.S. aggression against Venezuela. Now, when NATO started its big expansion to the east in Europe, something we agreed with Russia, with the Soviet Union when they dissolved, that we would not go into the the former Soviet states with NATO, and we would not go into the allied states of the Soviet Union. Now we're in 11 of them there. But it started with the bombing that took place in Yugoslavia, and the anniversary of that is coming up actually on the 24th in a couple of days, and there will be a demonstration at noon at the United Nations to commemorate it by the Yugoslav community in New York. But that was used as a way to expand NATO in the eastern part of Europe. And the fear is, and this meeting with Brazil, is that that's maybe what they're trying to do in Latin America also. And that would be a very scary thing. However, you need to understand the sanctions. Sanctions are not just that they can't get goods. We have stolen their wealth. For instance, they have the Citgo oil company, which is there, and they also have refineries in the United States. We've taken those. They had huge accounts in Citibank in New York. Citibank froze those accounts, billions and billions of dollars. All countries that have massive amounts of gold, the standard that they do with that gold is they keep the resources in the Bank of London. The Bank of London has frozen their gold reserves. They are the third biggest producer of gold in the world, and they have the first largest oil reserves of any country in the world. So they have $1.3 billion that they don't have access to. In fact, hundreds of billions of dollars of their wealth they do not have access to. And this becomes the pressure that has led to some of the hyperinflation that we've seen there, and that has caused serious problems. So we've basically stolen their wealth, and the sanctions are part of that. So when they try to do trade with a country that is following the sanction regiment that the United States has laid out, they can't do trade because you can't write a check to them that will go through a bank in their country, because the bank in their country cannot give money or take money from them. And so that trade doesn't work. So it severely affects their economy in very, very many ways. It's just fortunate that there are a number of countries that are not abiding by the sanctions, such as Russia and China and Iran and South Africa and India and others.
Turkey. And the other thing is, although they have big reserves of oil, it's very thick oil. And to really move that oil, it has to be mixed with thinner oil. And the U.S. is stopping people from providing that kind of oil. So it's making even their oil industry very difficult for them to function with. So it's hurting the government in many, many ways. Just and that's the intention.
One more thing on the NATO thing. The NATO thing, I'm sorry to keep on talking here. We all know also that NATO is coming to Washington, D.C. on the 30th. And we are holding a demonstration there across from the White House at 1 o'clock in Lafayette Park. And I urge people to come. If you go to the website no2nato2019.org, you can hook up with some of the transportation that's going down there. It's very important. We've made a focus of this because NATO, I believe, in this meeting, will plan out their expansion in Latin America and plan out their coordinated attack against Venezuela. It's a very, very serious thing. And so hands off Venezuela is going to be a focus of that. And it's very, very important that we oppose this right now because they've said Venezuela's first and Nicaragua's second and Cuba is third. And they're going after the countries that have the oil to try to starve countries that don't have a lot, like China. And it's going to create it's a whole strategy that the imperialists are having for a serious move in terms of world dominance, as they are having difficult times with even small countries like Afghanistan. So it's very important that at this point that we oppose that and urge people to come to these actions.
To come out to D.C. on March 30th. And I'll drop later a link for in North Jersey, and then also we'll have a bus leaving early in the morning on Saturday, March 30th from Newark, and it will stop at New Brunswick. We'll drop a link on this feed later because I know there are seats available, and cost should not be a problem. So for anybody who cannot afford the suggested donation, there are a good amount of people who have donated. So yeah, I know Venezuela is going to be a major part of the March 30th. Hands Off Venezuela will be incorporated into the No NATO action on March 30th. And Brazil is now looking to join NATO, which I'm wondering at their meeting, are they going to discuss changing their name? It's the North Atlantic Treaty. So I don't, or they're going to have to change the, yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work. Yeah.
Well, we're doing plugs. We're also doing a national webinar on March 28th, and that's going to be on NATO and Latin America. One of the speakers is from Colombia, and he's an expert in U.S. military bases and NATO in Colombia. So if you go to popularresistance.org and look at the events page or our Facebook page, you'll see the information for how to register for that. But that's just to give people more information. So, when you come down on March 30th, you understand, what's going on and what the connections are.
And for those who can stay, there's going to be a series of events from March 30th to April 4th. We just found out today on April 4th, which is, by the way, the anniversary of the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King and the anniversary of his very important Beyond Vietnam speech that came out against the triple evils of militarism, capitalism, and racism. Mm-hmm. On April 4th, there'll be a meeting at the State Department where there'll be protests against the NATO meetings and against the NATO expansion. We're very concerned about Brazil and Colombia, which are both on the border of Venezuela. So that's the positioning is not coincidental.
Absolutely. And so we heard Trump talking about strengthening sanctions. We know that they attempted, or they actually were successful in shutting off the electric grid. What could the U.S. try to do next?
Oh,
I don't know.
We've also seen assassination attempts against Maduro.
Right. So as we mentioned, while we were there, the U.S. diplomatic staff were expelled from the country, and that's because they were literally working with the opposition and meeting with members of the military, trying to bribe them, to go against Maduro. It largely didn't work. There was a small group of military that, defected, and they went to Colombia, and they actually got abandoned in Colombia. The Colombian government is not supporting them and is kicking them out, so they're stuck. But what's worrisome is the possibility of paramilitaries coming in from other countries like Colombia, trying to create conflict and events that could be used to try to justify intervention. What's a good sign so far is that even allies of the United States are not supporting U.S. military intervention, including members of the Lima group like Brazil, and then also members of the European Union that are just saying that's too far. You can't go in that direction. But the people of Venezuela are prepared for any kind of possibility. Maduro has been telling them to make sure they have batteries and water and a stock of food, because nobody knows what the U.S. could try to do.
Venezuela is prepared. They will not give in to U.S. imperialism. They want peace. President Maduro said he wants to have a meeting with Trump. Trump has refused so far. They've met with Bolton. The foreign secretary has met with John Bolton. Wasn't very fruitful. They tried. They want peace. Yeah. But they are prepared for conflict if they need to. They're going to protect their independence. They have a military of 200,000. And since Trump announced 2 years ago that military action was possible, they have built up their civilian militia, now over 2 million. Armed and trained, so that's 2 million plus 200,000 military. On top of that, National Guard and police. And so that I told Colonel Ann Wright that, and people may know she's an activist who has a long experience as a colonel in the military and also in the State Department. And she said that that's bigger than the U.S. military.
Not just that. Could you imagine a dictator deciding to give arms to the people?
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
One of the
it's just absurd.
One of the most interesting and impromptu meetings that we had was after we met with Maduro, which is something we haven't really discussed, which was just a fascinating meeting. After we met with Maduro, we walked out of the presidential palace and so forth, where we met with him. And outside, there is an occupation that had been going on for about 2 weeks. And different groups come and occupy. And what they're doing is they're there to defend Maduro and the government against any attackers, whether it's the right wing in Venezuela or whether it's the United States and outside attackers. So when we were there, we walked in and, unannounced, and it was the oil workers that were there. And they had a leader of the oil workers was speaking, and then each of us kind of spoke to just, a very emotional thing, to chants and cheers and support from all these people. And then one guy got up and spoke very emotionally and so forth. And, at the end, he and I hugged each other. And he said to me, there's something else you should know. We're not just oil workers. We are armed oil workers. So that's the way they're preparing for whatever is necessary.
Whatever comes.
And by the way, this is not just Venezuela.
Yeah.
Russia has said stay out. China has said stay out. Russia and China are partnering with Venezuela in both their oil and gold because they're trying to pick up the slack that was left by the United States economic war. They've loaned Venezuela money. So if Venezuela is attacked, the U.S. is attacking China and Russia as well. And so this is a very serious issue. So people really should try to come down on March 30th. If they come down on April 4th as well, so stay that time. That would be one thing we saw in Venezuela was solidarity among the people. Very strong solidarity among the people against U.S. imperialism. And I think that solidarity is something we should take to heart and show solidarity with them as well. People, and even in the countries where the governments are following this foolish U.S. lead of recognizing this fake coup president, in those countries there are protests in support of Venezuela. So just because the leader says so doesn't mean the country feels that way. Yeah. And I can tell you, if they continue down this path, these countries that are supporting this fake coup president are going to pay a political price, because the people are not going to put up with a military coup or military or civil war created by the United States and Colombia and Brazil. They're not going to put up with it. And you'll see these governments losing power and being put out of office, because there are strong undercurrents in all of these countries that support Venezuela and are saying hands off Venezuela. We did an earlier International Day of Action on February 23rd. There were protests all over the world in support of President Maduro and the Venezuelan government and against U.S. imperialism. So these countries that's why they're saying no to military action, because they know there will be a political price for them to pay if they go wrong and a war begins in Venezuela. Everyone will know this war is a fake, based on lies, based on intimidation. We've laid those lies out on our Popular Resistance newsletter. I'd urge people to read that and read the links, because we get so much misinformation that we need to be educated as a movement. We need to educate others, because that's where movements begin, is education. Educate on the facts and mobilize people for March 30th and April 4th.
I mean, that's one of the things that was so amazing in Venezuela, was the amount of political education that people have at every level.
Amazing.
And every person, from the person you meet on the street to the government official, it works in imperialism to their conversation. And it's just, and it's constant. It's like, we're going to resist the imperialists. We see this imperialism. We understand what's happening. It's a result of U.S. imperialism. There's just such a deep understanding. And we were guests of a TV show.
Amazing TV show.
One of the nights that we were there called Con el Mazo Dando. It's like beating with a club. And it was the host is Diosdado Cabello, and he is the president of the National Constituent Assembly. And it's a 5-hour TV show.
Wait, that's just a 5-hour weekly TV show, and it's the most popular show in Venezuela. 5 hours.
And it's
Everybody
got
watches it.
music, and it's got funny little videos and things that the audience participates in, and he does political education, and he had over 80 pieces of paper on bulletin boards that were different stories that he went through one by one.
He went through all 80 news stories.
Wow.
Deep political education.
This is fake
5
news.
hours.
This is good things that happened, bad things that happened. This was fake news. This is what happened with the electrical thing. And then he has these phrases that people will repeat. So they have always loyal, never traitors, and all these things that people repeat. And it's the whole thing is political education, that people are getting this.
And they had
every week.
The host had named each one of us and had us stand up and wave to the audience and to the cameras. And so, Joe, you'll know this is true because Joe stands out with his fantastic Albert Einstein hair. The next day, when we were in the streets, everybody knew who we were.
Well, you got it in the elevator, Joe.
Yeah, the waiters
everywhere. We were getting it everywhere. People
everywhere.
saw us. And we also did press conferences, so people got to know us.
Great.
And when I went to see this opposition demonstration, some people said, "Well, you shouldn't go because everybody's going to know you." People come up to us and have come up to us in the streets and at the demonstration want to take pictures with us.
We had so many pictures taken. Oh my God!
What's your process? And so we went. The demonstration, as I said, didn't really happen, although the counter action did happen. But it's clear that they wanted to put us up there, and they wanted to use it as a way to increase the political education of people and let them know that we are here. And Maduro just, was very clear. He supports, on the 23rd of February, he was driving in his car, and the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, this guy Carlos, who was with us a lot, was at the demonstration in New York. He's since been thrown out of the country, but he texted Maduro. And Maduro was driving his own car. Maduro held up his phone to his they did a video of him giving his support to the demonstration on February 23rd and thanking the people of New York for coming out. And
that's
then
beautiful.
Tweeted it out.
We remember we told him about March 30th, and that the Boston Bus Drivers Union was going to send a bus down for the protest on the 30th. And Maduro began his career as a bus driver, got involved in the union, got involved in politics, got involved with Hugo Chavez, became the foreign minister, which is like the Secretary of State, and then became president. But he said, I'd love to drive that bus down to from Boston to New York.
That would be great. Maybe
so
we could
funny.
arrange that.
He's also, by the way, over a contract to be a baseball player at the Los Angeles Dodgers. So he's an interesting guy.
Definitely.
That union, by the way, which is United Steelworkers Union that organizes the bus drivers, it's local 8751, is paying for the bus.
Excellent.
And asking people if they can to pay $30. If they can't, it's free for them. So they're trying to mimic. And that bus drivers union is very interesting because it is largely majority Haitian. And there's been a big connection between what's going on in Haiti and Venezuela. And there's so much racial overtones on this. People in Venezuela are African Venezuelan and indigenous and combinations of all that. And they're every color. It goes from deep, dark, black, all the way to Guaido. It's every
even white.
Yeah, lily white. So it's and so it has a racial connection and a class connection, and it can be a political education for people here too.
Well, there's like a 200-year history between Venezuela and Haiti because Simón Bolívar was there in Haiti when they got their independence, and
that's when they ended slavery and became the first independent nation in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and they then provided support to Bolívar to go to Latin America and help liberate Latin America. And they gave weapons and they gave military support and other things.
And so on the Venezuelan flag, is also the symbol of Haiti.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
solidarity there to fight for independence.
And same thing with Chavez was in Haiti when they got rid of Baby Doc and brought in, elected Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And he was inspired by how they did that and thought he could go back to Venezuela and try to do the same thing. So there's very close ties between them. And Venezuela has helped Haiti out through a program called the Petro-Caribe. And so there's just a very deep solidarity between those countries.
And in fact, the people may have noticed the most recent uprising in Haiti that's still ongoing. The president of Haiti, who was basically selected by Hillary Clinton.
He came in third.
He came in third in the election, but Hillary Clinton said he's the president. And they came out in support of the U.S. coup fake president, and the people of Haiti, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. There were a whole lot of other problems, but that was the issue that made them go to the streets. And there's an ongoing uprising now against that president.
Yeah. So everyone, let's show our solidarity to Venezuela and learn more about why say no to NATO, and come down to D.C. March 30th through April 4th. And do you guys have any closing words? I thank you all so much for your time. You all must be exhausted after your trip. But do you have any closing words for our viewers? What do we do? How do we
just say, if between now and the 30th, if people can get on a bus or get in a car or get down there to do that. But if they're members of of organizations, I would urge them to start sending out some more information about it. Because when people get it from very different areas, they can see that it's really happening. And again, they can go to the website at NATO2019.org to get all the information they would need for any emailing. And there's also flyers there that they could send out, JPEGs of flyers and the transportation information.
Good.
And if people are interested in UNAC, they can go to the UNAC website, which is unacpeace.org, UNACPEACE.org.
Okay, for more information.
One of our key tasks is to counter the misinformation that's going on around Venezuela. And so at popularresistance.org, we're posting regularly, articles that people can use to educate themselves so they can counter the lies. We've done a number of newsletters on this. A number of weeks ago, we did one called What Activists Need to Know About Venezuela. And then this past weekend was really busting the lies that are being told about Venezuela. So go to popularresistance.org. Don't believe what you hear in the corporate media, but if you want to figure out what's really going on, and then share stuff out, because people need to have this information, and share on social media, like Joe said, about what's coming up on March 30th. There are about 1,000 people, close to 1,000 people out last weekend in D.C. for the Hands Off Venezuela march. We need to make that even bigger.
Absolutely.
And
that we're going to stand
people should
up.
also know about the takeover of the embassy in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
That's right. Just last night, there was our allies were protecting the Venezuelan embassy by staying in the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. to stop it from being taken over by the opposition. Let me just say a couple quick points. One, our job, if everyone who sees this video goes to our websites and forwards articles about Venezuela, that is creating media. That is creating information that people need, because we are lied to in this country, and we need to come back against those lies with the truth. And we have the truth. It's available. It's online. And unfortunately, this is a bipartisan problem. Bernie Sanders' statements on Venezuela are terrible. He puts out the lies about a dictator, authoritarian, killing nonviolent all lies. Yeah. Everything he said was a lie.
Yes, according to Trump rhetoric.
Every progressive Democrat, except I think Tulsi Gabbard's the only one who's got it right. Everybody else has got it wrong. So even progressive Democrats need to be pressured and educated. They need to know that the public knows the truth. And can see through their lies, because some of these people are running for president, and we can't have liars as president. We can't have people who are misinformed and believing this propaganda or spreading lies. Either one is unacceptable. So our job is to educate ourselves, educate others, and share the information widely to let them know that we know the truth.
Absolutely. And it's Democratic primary season. So if you are hold your heroes accountable. Right?
Well, remember, there is an anti-imperialist party. It's called the Green Party.
Absolutely, that's what I am. So I'm not participating in the imperialistic Democratic
Greens
or
right here.
Republican Party.
4 Greens right here.
Yes. So if they're your heroes, then you better hold them accountable. Call them out, because except for Tulsi Gabbard, yeah, they're all just repeating the Trump rhetoric. And that's okay when it comes to Venezuela. It's ridiculous.
Well, it was the Obama rhetoric before the Trump rhetoric, so.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. Like I said, I know you guys must be exhausted, so rest up. And I know I will see all of you on March 30th. Is everybody going to be?
Yep.
We'll be there.
We'll be there.
Okay, good. And just a little shout to our viewers. If you could help us continue to run, go to njrevolutionradio.com. There's a donation link. So please, so we can help counter the propaganda that's out there. Any small amount will do. And thank you guys again so much for your time, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Okay.